No way. No. Is that real?
Yep, that was my reaction when I got my 50 for further, or as you'd say, general 3-4. Throughout the entirety of the year, I had 12 SACs, 2 VCA exams, and across all those 12 SACs and 2 VCA exams, I dropped 1 mark. And the funny thing is, I didn't really do anything special, and I didn't have a tutor. And I think with a little bit of guidance, anyone can crush it in further. So, let's give you that little bit of guidance. Do you need a tutor for further? The answer is no. I didn't have a tutor for further, and I don't think you need one either. To begin with, further is not a very content-dense subject. You get to have your CAS calculator as well as a bound reference in each of your internal school assessments, as well as your external VCA exam. In terms of trying to memorize content, that's not really a problem in further. You don't really even have to memorize content. If you forget a definition, you forget how to do a certain type of question, you can literally take example questions into the exam. For my exam, you get 1 bound reference. I took my notes as well as the entire textbook into the... But regardless, at the end of the year, when everybody walks into the further exam, it's not the content that actually separates the top achievers from the average achievers. And that content knowledge itself, because that content knowledge is not a very deciding factor in how well students do in further, getting a tutor doesn't really help. Regardless, getting a tutor doesn't really help in many other cases, but especially in further, you definitely don't need a tutor. What's going to separate you from other people is the processes you have embedded to solve questions that will help you not make mistakes. And a tutor can, tell you how to do a question, right? But until you come up with your own approach to approach that question, and in that approach, make mistakes in practice, and then embed precautionary actions that you take in your process to get to a question, like steps that you would take that ensure that you don't make that mistake in a SAC or exam, that is what's going to get you those top marks in further. So a tutor is definitely a no-no in further. Unlike math methods and math specialists, the actual difficulty in understanding the concepts in further is much, much easier as well. So now moving on to tips for SACs. Now before I begin, I want to tell you a little story about the only 1 mark I dropped in that entire year in my further journey, or general 3-4, whatever, right? So basically, the first tip in itself is underline keywords. And I know it's basic, and I know every YouTuber, blah, 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 people say it, but really do it. Now back to that quick story. I dropped 1 mark, and that mark basically was dropped because I didn't read that in the question stem, it said use this information for questions 7 and 8. I went straight to the information, thought that it's just, it's something I didn't need to look, didn't need to underline. Did question 7 because that was the next question and the information was right above it. But if this was the page, this is where they gave me that information. This was question 7, but question 8 was on the next page. So when I went to do question 8, I didn't have the information I needed to do that question. And because I hadn't read the earlier prompt properly and underlined it, I didn't know that the information I was looking for was half a page backwards in the book. And I never ended up finding that information in the exam. And that's the only mark I lost. So don't make that mistake. Underline keywords and make sure you really understand exactly what the prompt is telling you. Tip number 2 for SACs is be careful of the scale when dealing with graphs. A lot of the times the x-axis and the y-axis can actually have different scales, and you need to be aware of that and not make silly mistakes. Yeah, pretty straightforward, right? But I know plenty of friends that lost marks, so don't be that person. The third tip I have, especially in the data SAC, a lot of the times you're going to be given a large set of data that needs to be inputted into your CAS before you can do your questions. When doing that, after you input all the data, make sure you literally go through the entire table of data that you have inputted and double check it and even triple check it if you have the time to make sure you don't make any silly mistakes. Further is not a very time intensive subject. In all of my SACs, I finished with at least 20 minutes to go, and even on the exam, I had, I think, 10-15 minutes to go on both my exams, like easily. You definitely have time to double check to make sure your input entries are right, because if they are wrong, they'll give you some set of data that you need to put into your CAS and do some questions, and that data may account for like 10 to 15 marks, which may make up 25% of the SAC. So take those extra 2-3 minutes and make sure the data you input is correct, and do not make transposition errors. They will kill your SAC, and by killing your SACs, they will kill your study score, which kills your ATAR. If you don't want a dead ATAR, then double check and don't make transposition errors. My fourth tip is this is a subject where you get lots and lots of consequential marks, so make use of it. What do I mean by that? Okay, even if you have questions, and you're going to have plenty of these that are 1 mark, I want you to try to show as much working out as possible. A lot of the times there'll be like Question A, a case study, whatever. Bob gets a loan, okay? It's part A, B, C, D, and E. Part A may be only 1 mark, but the answer you get in part A is what you need to use in part B to get part B right. If you get part A right, that is A-okay, because you can get part B right, which the answer of part B will not match the answer that the teacher has because you've used the value from your part A. However, because your process is right, you will get a consequential. So remember, always show you're working out, even if the question is worth 1 mark. The 5th and final tip for SACs, know your CAS inside out. I have a lot of friends and a lot of juniors that are like messaging me, asking me for further help, that are telling me that they're like writing down all of the CAS functions into their bound reference. That is something you do not want to do. While further is a very time lenient subject, the SACs are definitely more time lenient than the exam. And you don't want to get into the habit of depending on your bound reference for CAS functions. Literally the whole subject depends on your CAS. Your CAS is allowed in every single SAC. Your CAS is allowed in your VCA exams as well. So get to know your CAS inside out. I remember when I was doing financial, which is I think the 2nd SAC in further math, my brain just knew whenever I saw like a particular word in a question that I had to go menu 3-1. Just know your CAS inside out. You don't want to waste time going back to your textbook for CAS functions. Don't do it. Now, bound reference advice for General 3-4. I think in the entire video, this is the most important section. To begin with, what is a bound reference? This is 1 bound. Now, if I was to get 2 books and I was to basically do this to them, right now it's 2 bounds. If I was to sticky tape this together so that now you can't separate it from the middle, this now becomes 1 bound. So that's what your bound reference is. For my bound reference, it was a copy, like it was an exercise book with all my notes and the actual textbook. And on top of that, I had practice exams. And I sticky tape, duct tape, all of that together, and that became my bound reference. And that is what I took into the exam. Your bound reference, it doesn't just have to be your notes or your textbook. You can literally compile a bunch of crap together, duct tape it, and take it all into the exam, all into the SACs, that sort of thing. Now, while we're on the topic, a lot of students decide to make their own bound references, their own notes, which is what I did as well, but I still recommend you taking in your textbook as well. And again, the reason to that, I'll give you a little story to explain. I was in a SAC once and I saw a question, and I knew I had seen that question before, but I forgot the process required to get to the answer. Well, guess what? I went through my textbook, and I'm not sure what textbook your school uses, but my school used Edroller, and I had done all the textbook questions inside the textbook as well. So I went to the chapter, I found a question which was literally the same concept. I still didn't know the right answer, and I didn't know the process to get to the answer. So what I did was, because it was a multiple choice question, I saw the question, it was the same concept as the question I had on the actual SAC. I went to the back of the textbook, went to the answers, found the right answer for the question in my textbook, and then I found the process that led me from that prompt to that practice answer in my textbook, and that basically made me realize the actual process that I needed to get to the answer. And then I basically took that process out of my textbook, put it on my SAC, boom, I got the answer. And it saved me a mark. And in further, every single mark counts. Definitely take your textbook into your exam. You may not need it, but if you do, you will thank me. The third advice I have for you guys for your bound reference is, after having done your previous year school SACs, always correct them and do them like physically. I know a lot of people have like iPads. I had an iPad myself and like do SACs digitally. But for further, print your previous year SACs out, do them and correct them in a red pen, because guess what? You can literally stick them to your notes and take it into the SAC. That is what I did throughout the year. But make sure you only take in relevant SAC. A lot of the times, schools will follow very, very similar formats as to the questions they come up with for the following years. So a lot of the times, if you don't know how to do a question, a lot of the times, I'm using that word a lot of the times, haha. If you don't know how to do a question and you have the previous year SAC attached to your bound, if the teacher has taken inspiration from that SAC, a lot of the times, oh my god, I was trying not to use a lot of the times, but you can basically look at those works out solutions that you've brought into the SAC and use that to answer questions within the SAC. Then when the next SAC comes around, do previous year SACs according to that topic. So if it's financial, do financial, add it to your bound, do it. Once the SAC's done, rip apart your bound and redo it, for your next SAC. And then obviously at the end of your exams, don't take school SACs in. School SACs are basically nothing like the actual exam at the end of the year. The actual exam is way easier in my opinion, and very much less application-y, And for the end of your exam, just do past VK exams and take the most recent ones in. Again, corrected with whatever color pen you want. And yeah, take that in. My next bound reference tip is, as I said earlier, a lot of people make their own bound references. That's something I did as well. And I do actually recommend for you to do it as well. Work on your own bound reference and don't do this like 2 or 3 weeks before your exam, because I know I kind of did that for methods and a lot of people do that. They make their actual bound reference for their exams like 2 to 3 weeks earlier. Don't do that. I'm trying to get this video out towards the start of the year. Make your bound reference as you go and add to it as you learn more content and as you get through the course. The reason as to why that is you, by the end of the year, if you've made your bound reference from the start of the year and you made it yourself and you used it in every single SAC, you're going to end up like memorizing certain concepts are on. So for example, financial, page 27 in your exercise book, data, page 12, you're talking about categorical data, whatever it may be. If you make a bound reference throughout the year, use it throughout the year, you're just going to know it inside out. It's going to save you a bunch of time and you just be more comfortable within SACs as well as exams. The very last tip for your bound reference, and this is the one that saved me the most amount of marks, is make a checklist or a plan for your SACs and exams. So usually I'd have this on the first page or on the last page of my bound reference. It'd be like, okay, I have 80 minutes for the SAC. First 5 minutes, I'm going to go through the entire SAC, just read it, check it out. Next, I want to, do question 1, whatever it may be. You don't really need to have a plan as to how much time you want to spend on each question, especially in SACs, because some questions may be like 20 marks, where another question may be 10 marks. But what you do want to do is you want to have a plan that tells you that you want to finish a SAC with roughly 20 minutes to go, and in the last 20 minutes, what is the checklist of items you want to do? For me, some of the checklist items was, after I'd finished the SAC and I had 20 minutes left, I would do one scan of the SAC where the only thing I was checking was decimal points. I don't care if my answer is wrong. I just want to make sure it is in the correct amount of decimal point that the teacher has asked of me. The second thing I'll do is make sure my significant figures were right, my units were right. These are silly mistakes that you may make, and it's hard to try to pick up on these as you check each answer for everything, whether it's correct, decimal point, significant figures. It's just easier. Finish a SAC, have a checklist of things you want to do to make sure you don't make silly mistakes. Go through your SAC a few times with a filter, decimal points, significant figures, blah, blah, blah. The last but one of the most important things that's going to help you really propel yourself in further is a mentor. And what I mean by a mentor is just find a kid, preferably at your school, who's already done further and done well in further, and try to convince them to kind of guide you throughout the year and basically just ask them a crap ton of questions. For the year 11s watching this, as unfortunate as it is, year 12 just have a massive advantage on you just because of the experience they have having done a VCE subject. And I remember when I was in year 11, I used to look at year 12s, especially my accounting and further class, and be like,
I'm on their level, I know what's up.
I know when to study for SACs, all this stuff. And it was only until I got to year 12, I realized how naive year 11s were. Like, I remember in accounting, when I was in year 11, I would start studying for a SAC maybe like 2 weeks earlier, and like all the year 12s had already started like a week and a half earlier. And that was me in year 12, and the year 11s were always a step behind. So if you can find yourself a mentor, preferably at your own school, because for further maths, each school will have a very different way they run the subject. So if you have someone accustomed to the way your school runs the subject, they'd be able to provide you with more valuable feedback as to what to do, when to do, why to do things to kind of set you up for that success. Try find that. Some of the questions you may ask your mentor for further or any other subject for the matter, I think I already did this for myself, but as in year 11, I talked to so many year 12s. I had a few year 12 mentors that I don't even think they knew they were my mentor. I would just ask them 1,000 questions constantly to make sure that I had knowledge that my peers who didn't have mentors themselves didn't have. So I was always a step ahead of my peers, gave me a competitive advantage to do well in my subject. I asked people, when did you study for your SAC? What did you have for breakfast before your SAC? And one of the very distinct conversations that I remember exactly is after I got my first accounting SAC back, because I did 2, 3, 4s in year 11, I didn't really do too well. And I messaged this year 12, who was school captain at the time, who got 100% on his first accounting 3-4 SAC. I said, bro, you look so cool, calm and collected when you do your SACs. Do you have any advice that can help me kind of replicate that aura going into my SACs? Because I didn't really do well in my first SAC because I panicked. And I remember he gave me this advice, and I remember it to this day, I don't even have to search it up. He was like, when he sits down to do a SAC, he really internalizes looks at the paper, looks at the pencil, and he tries to block everything out, tries to make it just about him, that pencil and the paper. He tries to internalize everything and just focus on that. Everything else is out. I may not have conveyed that message that he sent to me as well through what I just did to you guys, but I remember that really hit home. And a few weeks after, I went into my first ever further SACs, and I came out with 100% on all 3 of my SACs. So having a mentor throughout year 11, year 12, VCE, huge advantage. Find yourself a mentor, ask them loads of questions, pick them until they tell you to kind of piss off, and then find another one. And yeah, as long as you do those things, work hard throughout the year, study a little bit ahead, you're going to be just fine. But yeah, that was kind of all. Hopefully you guys can have some similar reactions and similar results as to what I had in further. If you guys have any ideas on videos that you guys want me to make that will help you in your VCE, high school, uni, or whatever journey, then yeah, leave them in the comments down below. I would love to hear your thoughts about this video and whether you found it useful. And if you didn't find it useful, why, so I can make future videos even better for you guys. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.